Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
We started this podcast a couple years ago. A couple of friends sitting around talking Pirates baseball. Craig's a huge Pirates nut and loved writing about them, and goes to me like, hey, let's do a podcast. I'm like, okay, fine. We've never taken ourselves too seriously, and we've enjoyed doing it. And it is funny to me. It is enjoyable. I get a kick out of the idea that this little podcast, in the face of so many experts and insiders and people covering the Pirates and supposedly having their sources, and they know everything, and they've got better access than we have, just a couple of guys, right, talking Pirates. In the face of all of that, you, my friend, gave a very specific timeline many different ways. You did it on social media, I think more on this show, but you talked about it a little bit on this show. The idea of when Paul Skenes would be here. And everybody started with the hype that he was coming this week. And Craig's sitting there going, nope, my sources don't have that. My sources say this thing's going to be later in the month. My sources are saying end of May. And I want to give you a chance to talk about what you'd already revealed about what the Pirates want to do with Paul Skenes. And of course, you've got to be careful with this guy. He throws the ball really fast. And generally, guys that do that an awful lot have arm problems at some point. You don't want to rush him up here and then all of a sudden lose him for 2 years. You don't want him to be Steven Strasburg. That's the thing you don't want. So the Pirates clearly have a plan. What is the plan, my friend? Because I trust you at this moment. After Derek Shelton comes out and says, all you experts were wrong, he's pitching in Indianapolis. He ain't coming here this week. What are you hearing?
Well, Chris, this kind of all started, I guess it would have been back maybe not a full month ago, but probably at least, 3 weeks ago, I'll say, was basically hearing and laid out, and I did lay it out on the Minor League News and Brews portion of this, podcast on there, of what I saw as kind of the plan and laying it out for what, was going to happen with Paul Skenes, when he was going to come up, different stuff like that. I do know that, pretty much I saw a bunch of the guys from MLB Pipeline, a lot of the experts, they originally said like May 3rd. And I'm like, there's no way. What I'm hearing is pretty much getting around 40 innings of work by the end of May, and then kind of seeing where you go from there. Hearing more as that goes on, there was other people that came out that then changed, and they're just like, well, okay, well, now it's May 11th. And they have since, after Derek Shelton speaks, and maybe even a little bit before that, they might have been getting some inkling that there's at least 3 more starts that are coming in Indianapolis. And the thing that I didn't understand from the beginning, Chris, is when people were coming out on Sunday and saying that he was coming on the 10th, and the 10th was it was almost written in stone. Number one, he just went on 4 days rest for the first time in his professional career. Jack McMullen, who I've had on the Minor League News and Brews, pointed out that he did do a 5-game turnaround when he was with LSU through 120 pitches in each of those performances, which is somewhat malpractice because, the LSU coach just wants to win a national championship, but that's what he's paid to do and that's what he's there for. But did that. So you're telling me that you have these sources that are telling you that he's coming on the 10th, which would be on his second 4 days rest as a professional for the second time in a row, and that he's going to be debuting in Pittsburgh. How in the world does that even make sense? I mean, I understand that you probably were told this by people, but you may need to go back and like check those sources a little bit, because number one, it didn't make sense baseball wise. It didn't make sense from what I was hearing and what I was sharing with everybody. And here's the thing is, Chris, I care less about being right about this and just kind of put it out there for people, because for me, that was also best case scenario. There's still people out there saying, why wouldn't you push it back a couple weeks after that? Because then you could avoid Super 2. Yes, that could happen, but it doesn't change the fact that the goal has always been for him to be around 40 innings by the end of May. They're working it out that way. Right now, Jared Jones is about 41 innings. Paul Skenes is about 27 innings. That 14-inning difference, which will grow if they take their time with Skenes over his next, few starts in Indianapolis. And you know what that equals? That equals 2, 3, 4 starts on the end of the season, because he's actually built up more than Jared Jones would be if they both stay healthy. So if you want Paul Skenes at the end of the season, it's such low-hanging fruit. We've seen 93.7 The Fan go off about it and speak absolutely idiotically about it, saying he should have been going on 4 days rest this entire time if this is what the check, the box check was going to be. Because they'll say Ben Cherington's like, we need to check this box, need to check this box. He does need to check these boxes. And you need to be careful with him. J.J. Cooper comes out, guy I respect from Baseball America, respect him a lot, and just basically puts out this thing that, limiting this workload in innings, doesn't protect you from getting injured. Well, do you know what definitely doesn't protect you from getting injured? Overuse. We've seen that with Spencer Strider already. We've seen this with so many other players. So do I guarantee this is going to work? No. But it's also, I mean, there's too much limited stuff. They use Hunter Green as an example. They use a couple other guys as an example. And they say, well, if they're going to go shorter, then they're going to throw harder. Well, Skenes actually, in some ways, dialed it back, threw more off-speed pitches during this last start and different stuff. Yes, he did pump it up over 100 because that's not as much effort for him. I honestly believe Paul Skenes could probably hit 103, 104 like Mason Miller if he wanted to. So he is dialing it back. It's just absolute, I don't think this is about Super 2. I don't believe this is about holding a player back. And the other part of this that people are missing the point of that has happened over these last few weeks as it's been quote unquote pushed back in their mind is that the Pirates rotation is actually performing well. You may not care if Bailey Falter is a part of the future plans, but guess who cares about that? The Pirates. You've got a left-handed pitcher who has just a little bit over a year of service time, and you can have him on your team for the next 4 years, so you don't have to go out and spend that $8 million on Martin Perez that you would hopefully spend in a different direction. So to say, oh yeah, we'll bump Bailey Falter back to the bullpen. The Pirates aren't thinking that way. Oh, we'll just send Quinn Priester back down. Quinn's had 2 quality starts in a row. Chris, you got me fired up a little bit, and I'm not trying to say oh, my sources are better than your sources. A lot of this was just common sense. And you believe something that you wanted to believe, because guess what? I want Paul Skenes up here as well. Whenever I find out that Paul Skenes is pitching, guess who's going to be there? I've been there for Quinn Priester's debut. I've been there for Garrett Cole's debut, Neil Walker's, Andrew McCutcheon's. I mean, Josh Bell, I was there a day late because actually your sister was in town and we had dinner reservations with them the night before for a birthday or something. So we went the next day. So I'll be there. I'm excited, but just use common sense, people.
First off, there's a lot there, but I love it. First off, I think you were telling me you're thinking it could possibly happen in the last week of May, right? That's possible.
May 24th, 25th, because it will happen.
That's what you're hearing, and that's how it would work out. Secondly, I love your comment there on Bailey Falter. I think that Pirates fans looking to get rid of him are missing something. They're missing the point, right? Like we sit here all the time. We'll look at the roster. We're like, okay, this is what you have, right? We've been doing that for years now. This is what you have, right? And when this season started, what you had was Mitch Keller, Marco Gonzales, and Martin Perez. That's what you had. Jared Jones was a question. You weren't exactly sure. Was it going to continue what you were seeing in spring training? Bailey Falter was, how are they going to use him? And it was a question of when would Quinn get here and would Priester be good this time around and another go? When would Skenes get here? That's what the conversation was just a couple of months ago. Take the win, Pirates fans, with Bailey Falter. The unexpected rise of a player is one of the most beautiful things in baseball. And not every team gets it. And for every prospect that you have that you wish will turn into something, let's say you got 10 prospects, you're lucky if 3 of them become good. I mean, it's a crapshoot no matter what their pedigree is. Just pick up a list of the top 100 MLB prospects on MLB Pipeline 10 years ago and tell me how many of them actually became ball players you remember. And that's how prospects work. So when you get a gift in a pitcher who's 27 years old that you have control of, that's not going to be an ace, right? I mean, his whip is 4.34 and his fielding independent pitching is 4.91. His ERA plus is under 100 at 95, but his walks and hits per innings pitched at 1.018. His hits per 9 inning at 7. His home runs per 9 under 2, but still pretty high, right? But I mean, that is actually a very similar number to what Jared Jones is giving up right now. He's giving up 1.5 home runs per 9 innings. His strikeouts per 9 are nothing that's exciting. He's a bottom of the order guy or bottom of rotation guy, but he's a starting pitcher right now until somebody proves otherwise to me. And if you've got a guy like Paul Skenes coming and you've got a Jared Jones already, and you've got a Quinn Priester now through 3 starts with a 1.286 whip, and a 3.31 ERA. The fielding independent pitching indicates he's been a little lucky. Okay. And that his defense has really stepped up for him. So I'm not going to sit there and make declarations about him. But Keller, Jones, Priester, Skenes on the way. Falter? Do you have a rotation right now? Do you have a long-term rotation right now that's coming together? Where eventually Martin Perez, who really is a bottom part of the rotation guy, no longer becomes necessary, where Marco Gonzales shows up and you're trying to figure out, well, where do I put him? Because everybody else is pitching so well. This is what you needed to have happen if you were going to be competitive this year. This is what I described when I said you're off to a hot start. You might cool off at some point. You probably want to be around 500 midway through the season. You're going to get a bunch of pitching that's going to show up. And the young talent trying to figure out at the plate what's going on, if they can come together, this is a second half team that makes a run. So far, I still believe that. Even with the bumps and the bruises, because of guys like Bailey Falter.
Are you a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates and supporting small businesses? If so, Bucs in the Basement has you covered. Introducing the Bucs in the Basement VOUCH store with products from places like Split Rock Coffee, coffee with a purpose, established, owned, and operated by disabled veterans, sworn to protect America, or Camp Craft Cocktails, more than cocktails. It's a mission to build longer tables where everyone is welcome. We try and vouch for these products. Bucs in the Basement, proudly brought to you by VOUCH. Visit our VOUCH store at bucksinthebasement.com or simply click on the link in the show notes. And with Bailey Falter, I mean, the thing was, Chris, 2 years ago, he was pitching meaningful games for the crosstown, cross state Philadelphia Phillies to like the tune of like a 1.2 something whip. I mean, it's not like he hadn't had success, and this is in no way guaranteeing like, career long or even season long or month long success or whatever it may be. But the Pirates obviously identified something. I believe I said something last week about the fact that for some reason, Oscar Marine has a thing where he can get soft tossing lefties to find success. Did it with Tyler Anderson, who they, faced last night, and Edward Olivares cleared one, over the bleachers in left field, but I mean, found success and got paid after Pittsburgh. Jose Quintana has done that. Martin Perez is doing it right now. So it shouldn't be a surprise that, in some ways that Bailey Falter was doing that. But I mean, people just want to move past, players that maybe they don't like or they don't see as part of the future and just move to people. Like they'll mention like Anthony Salamito and not.
He's not ready yet, though. He's not going to be here for a little while. And what are you rushing a guy like that for? Be thankful that he will be here eventually, and you can take your time a little bit, because it really did feel, Craig, like you're going to have to rush guys here.
Yeah.
Didn't it feel like you were behind? I mean, like seriously, black is white, up is down. Cats and dogs are living together. I mean, the Pirates have figured out the pitching, the starting pitching is doing better than expected right now and looks better than expected long term. And meanwhile, I look at a lineup that I'm like, can anybody hit? Like, I thought this was going to be better. I thought the lineup was going to be better because last year I watched Ben Cherington find these little diamonds in the rough and pull all the right levers with his pro scouting. And I'm like, well, O'Neal Cruz will be back and everybody's going to take another step. And I'm like, ugh, right? Like, so, I mean, like, look, I'm not excited about the pitching. The pitching is the least of your problems right now. Starting pitching, least of your problems. Okay.
Which is kind of crazy to think, man. And yeah, and we say the hitting and different stuff like that. And once again, like people, I feel like I'll lay this out. This is the worst time of year for Pirates, I guess, media or news or whatever it may be. The draft is over. So, I mean, there's only so many stories that you can get out of that for Steelers fans. The Penguins didn't make the playoffs for the second year in a row because we would normally have, Stanley Cup playoff hockey to talk about. And, camp for the Steelers doesn't open up again until like August.
I know. And you're already listening to stupid stories like, are they going to have Justin Fields return kicks? Like that's.
Yeah. And here's the
everybody's grasping for something to talk about in Pittsburgh. And you know what? I think the problem is you have a lot of people turning their eyes to the Pirates who didn't look at them as closely as we looked at them. And other podcasts. There are other podcasts in the marketplace as well who have been following this team for the last couple of years and have been really the only voice of the team. And I think that there are times when you have the mainstream media who avoids talking about this team, then try to sound like they know something about it, and they sound stupid.
Oh, it's like
they're not really getting what the team is, how it was constructed, and where they're at in the build that they're going, and how do you win this year? You win this year the way that we've been describing it, right? Like I'm upset that they're under 500 right now, but they're not 10 under 500 right now. They've got pitching. Pitching wins championships. They got to figure out the hitting. Derek Sheldon has to figure out how is he going to manage a team that can't hit a lot of home runs because there's not enough. How can he manage a team that's going to be basically a 250 hitting team? Because that's what they are. And that's you got to run, guys. You got to run a lot. You got to manufacture runs. You got to find a way to get guys going, but you also have to find a way to scratch out those runs for this pitching staff that's keeping guys off base and giving you an opportunity every single day.
Yeah, it's in town stupid is what it is. Usually it's out of town stupid, but it's in town stupid. Just as like you said, they avoid talking about the Pirates, and they usually get to avoid talking about the Pirates for 11 out of the 12 months. But now, because of the reasons I described, they actually have to talk about them. So the same people that were calling for Henry Davis to get called up too early last year are now bashing the development because Henry Davis has been demoted and now, you've screwed up his development and it's a failure. But then they still point to Contreras for the Brewers as like the guideline of why can't we get a catcher like this? But they completely forget that when he was with the Braves, when they brought him up, they didn't have a 37-year-old DH filling and clogging up that spot. So they were able to split his time between DH and catcher, and to be able to bring him along hitting and catching instead of asking this kid who's caught 2 games, who hadn't caught that much in even his professional career, to then catch and hit at the same time. So they didn't screw up his development.
You're right about that. I mean, like, it's amazing you're bringing that up, Craig. It's amazing you're bringing that up, because who did we give as example to how we wanted to see Henry Davis handled? We gave William Contreras. And I'll be honest with you. The reason I knew so much about William Contreras is because of fantasy baseball, of my dynasty fantasy baseball league, and the fact that he was a prospect that I had scouted, and I watched how the Braves were using him, and I watched how he was developed there, and I watched how the Brewers handled it when they brought him on. And remember, when he was traded, he was not the number one thing in that 3-team trade that was being moved along, but he was the most interesting piece to somebody who's a prospect hound and pays attention to those players. And he was not forced into he was an outfielder basically for the Braves and a DH while they were trying to bring him along. And remember when we were talking about that being how Davis was going to be used, we talked about that as that's the blueprint. In fact, it seemed like that's what the Pirates are going to do, but they made a few mistakes, right? Like the veteran catcher they went out and got in Grandal is a habitually injured ball player who cannot consistently catch games and has shown that over the last several years. And I don't know what tape they were watching, but anybody who's just can look back on what he's been the last couple of years sees a guy who basically hits around the Mendoza line, gets on base, goes on a tear every once in a while or hit a few home runs, generally from one side of the plate, even though he switch hits. He generally when he's batting lefty is when he gets on his little run, and he's constantly injured. He's got back problems. His knees are getting older. He's an older catcher who's on the decline. It was the wrong guy to go and get when you were already having problems at catcher and you needed consistency. I'll never understand that move. I'll never understand why the money was spent that way on a catcher, and here it comes, and you spent $10 million on a relief pitcher. I'll never get it, Craig. I'll never understand it. You want to yell about something? Yell about that, folks. Yeah, I don't listen to a lot of Pittsburgh radio. Are we the only people yelling about that? Because it should be the number one thing you're yelling about.
No, people, and that's where it's keep on going to other stuff again, is people are yelling about, Rowdy Tellez, dude, you shouldn't have, thought you had a home run over the Clemente wall and then had to sprint faster than that man has probably ever sprinted in his life to second base. But you are just mad at him because he told you not to boo. And the same people that are celebrating that was like, he's standing up for David Bednar. So that's our guy. Good job, Rowdy. And then he goes on. Rowdy Tellez over the past week is your hottest hitter. Like, that is the person you shouldn't be, going against. Rowdy Tellez, Connor Joe, O'Neal Cruz are your top 3 hitters over the past week.
I started Connor Joe over Brian Reynolds in fantasy baseball this week.
Yeah.
And I started Connor Joe. I picked him up and I benched Brian Reynolds to put Connor Joe in because he's hotter. We got some problems with the hitting on the Pirates. When I'm doing that, there's problems. There's real problems.
No, and the bigger thing for me here is that you are not going to Brian Hayes, who has over the past week a 14 WRC plus. Michael A. Taylor, who you will never admit that it wasn't the greatest signing, because everybody will be like, well, you took him out when he was playing hot in their first 2 games. No, like Chris says, look at the back of his baseball card. He's had a -10 WRC plus over the past week. I mean, it's absolutely insane that people that you choose to get mad at, they're like, well, you should probably, Andrew McCutchen should be leading off every single game with his 41 WRC plus over the past
Here's
week.
The thing that I don't understand at all. I don't understand how a team can sit there and say that you want to be competitive and you want to make it into the postseason when you're taking an aging veteran who clearly is a part of Pirates history that you adore, and you're continuing to plug him in for the tune of 26 games so far, 106 plate appearances, hitting 187 in Andrew McCutchen. Okay? It ends for all of us, folks, at some point, I mean, like, what are we doing here? It goes back to the Henry Davis thing. It goes back to, like, it'd be nice if we had that DH spot that was open. It's not like he's a DH is in there hitting 250 and he's got an OPS of like 800. Right? It's not like he's doing something in there that makes you say, well, we got to keep his bat in the order. He's hitting 187. You just sent down Davis hitting 162. What's the difference between the two of them? Well, one of them still, you hope, has time in the majors left, and one of them is stubbornly against retiring.
Yeah, that's pretty much.
I'm going to say it. I know he is beloved, but the stats speak for themselves. His second half was down. I never understood why you brought him back in the first place. I get it. He's beloved. I make that joke. I do. I make that joke. I make that joke about the fact that they took Carlton Fisk, the guy who's waving and everything for the Red Sox and is a Hall of Fame catcher. And in the middle of a season with a young and up-and-coming team on the south side of Chicago, the Chicago White Sox gave him a Harley and let him ride out of the ballpark and released him because they needed to get him out of the way. And they couldn't find a way to move him on because he didn't want to leave and he was beloved. And I look at Andrew McCutchen now, decades later, and I go, does he like Harleys? Like, what do we have to do here?
and people, and here's the thing is, people, guess what? Like, I've told this story as well. Like, I love Andrew McCutchen. Andrew McCutchen is my 17-year-old daughter's favorite player. It is my 17-year-old nephew's favorite player. They went together and got a jersey that has now been passed down to our family that my 7-year-old son does not fit in anymore because he's a Moose. And so we passed it along, and we were supposed to go to the game on Sunday, and it was going to my 7-year-old niece. Like, we have passed this McCutchen jersey down to every single family member since it was bought. Like, I love Andrew McCutchen, and you say, okay, well, he's batting better at leadoff. And yeah, that may last for a little bit and he'll give you some professional plate appearances. But man, like, you talk out of both sides of your mouth. Like you said, it's like, okay, well, we want to be competitive. So why is this person in the lineup? But yet then we defend why Andrew McCutchen is in there. Like I said, the low hanging fruit, like everybody's like, well, why is Jared Triolo in there? As far as WAR goes, especially like B WAR, like he is your top player because he provides so much defense, and he's actually been hitting better over the past week. Edward Olivares has been hitting better. Brian Reynolds has been hitting better, but the guys that haven't are Andrew McCutchen, Jack Sawinski, Brian Hayes, Michael A. Taylor, Joey Bart. Like, yeah, that's why I was saying, go out and get a catcher. You didn't go out and get a catcher. Yeah, it hurts that Jason DeLay's injured, but like, I don't. Then you got Yasmani Grandal and Joey Bart right now, and you got
There's another 37-year-old hitter out there, and this one won an MVP, who took an option to the minor leagues for the Houston Astros because he was a detriment to his team and wanted to keep playing, by the name of Jose Abreu, and he just did it a couple of weeks ago. Pirates fans. Okay. And I mean, I don't know. I get these guys want to do it forever. I'm turning 47 this week. I'm 10 years older than these guys. They're kids to me. Right. And I still want to pretend that I'm in my late 20s and early 30s, but I'm not. And like, I don't know, man. I see other teams handling veterans that for crying out loud, the Astros don't even have to care about what Jose Abreu does. He wasn't even one of their players up until recently. They're just wasting money on a free agent contract with him. And they haven't DFA'd him. And he at least understands that he's not helping the team because he had to accept that option. I'm sorry. Like, Kutch is a good player. When I say good player, he's a guy who you have history with who's done great things in his career. He's also 37 years old and hit 187. You can't sit there and say that you're trying to make the postseason and that you as a fan want this team to win ball games and you're angry about where they're at right now in the standings and still sit there and argue with me that Andrew McCutchen should be playing on this team. You can't say both. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Chris, Ben Cherington does speak a lot of word salad at times. And this is talking about like being competitive and different stuff, because the big thing, like the joke at the end of the last episode was that does Jake Lamb still play baseball? Yeah, he plays baseball in Indianapolis, but you're still riding. We should be bringing Jake Lamb up because he's hot. And Rowdy Tellez is your hottest hitter right now. Nick Gonzales, I would like to see get a shot at some point. Alika Williams has struggled, but he's pretty much a defensive, replacement at the end of games and starts on some off days here and there. But yeah, it's very, very weird. I get nervous because last night, saw Ono Cruz come out of the box just a little bit like twinging on the ankle. I start to gasp or whatever. It sure would be nice to put him in at DH for a couple days a week.
It sure would be nice if the Pirates could figure out how to add hitting onto their team because they need it, right? Like, There's already teams that are rumored to be getting ready to sell players. There are already teams out there. I mean, look, the Marlins just got rid of the modern day Tony Gwynn in Luis Arias.
Yeah.
I mean, there's hitters out there. And we've always talked about the fact that at some point you have a pretty good system and you have players, and it might be time to go look for a hitter. And that wouldn't have been a bad hitter to add on to your team. And at some point, Ben Cherington and company are going to have to figure out what do we have and what do we need to replace if they really want to be competitive this year. Okay. And they should be able to go out and do it. But if you would have told me this team was going to have to look for hitting over pitching to add to their team to have a chance at making the postseason, I would have laughed at you. And now I truly believe it. This is a team that does not have a pitching issue. They should be able to find enough bullpen with the arms that they have in their system and what's currently available. They should be able to find enough starters with what they have available and what is coming up. They have an issue with finding hitters. They need to find a bat or two before the trade deadline if they're really competing. And they have to, and Shelton has to start managing a team with the belief and the understanding that it's a 250 hitting team that doesn't hit enough home runs. So now you better be managing in that way. You better be creating runs. You better be running all the time. You better be trying to find a way to scratch out what you can because of the staff that you have. Because that's how you add wins. That's how you hang around. That's how you stay relevant enough that your general manager will be able to walk in and see your cheap ass owner and say, we need to make this deal and we need to bring in this bat because we want to get back to the playoffs. That's what you should be looking at, Pirates fans. That's how you should be viewing this team.
Chris, before we get going here, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat for just 1 second here. And it's about the Nick Gonzales call up right here, right now, because there's a lot of stuff out there. The underlying metrics are showing that he's still struggling against the same pitches he's been struggling with. His strikeout rate is down, but it may be based upon, the types of pitches he's being thrown. He does have a chase rate, and a whiff rate that's a little bit higher than it should be as those underlying metrics, but is performing. There's a possibility just in my mind of thinking, and it might just be a little bit crazy, is that maybe you don't want to bring him up because then maybe you'll show his warts that he showed last year in the time that he was up in the 200 plate appearances that he got,
right?
That you might be able to sell him to a team and say, look, he's doing well down here. Look at the numbers. And hopefully they don't dig into it too far.
Would you take Eloy Jimenez and think that you might be able to keep him healthy to hit a few home runs for your team and trade a guy like Nick Gonzales to the White Sox who are stupid enough to take him?
Just put him in the DH spot.
Wrap him in cellophane too.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change.